Okay, so I've been lurking on Reddit for years, but never thought I'd actually post anything here. But I need to get this off my chest, because holy, the last 2 days have been insane. And honestly, I'm still processing everything. Some background. My parents split when I was 9. Dad was never great with money, but he tried his best. Mom, though, she was obsessed with status and climbing the social ladder. When I was 11, she met Frederick, this guy who owned a few local businesses and had money. Within like 8 months, they were married, and we moved into his McMansion, with his kids, Everly, 14, and Oscar, 12. From day one, Frederick made it clear me and my little sister Catalina were basically unwanted baggage that came with Mom. He'd joke about how much extra we cost him in groceries, or how our rooms could have been a home theater and game room. He'd give his bio kids new phones and gaming systems, while telling us we should be grateful for a roof over our heads. Mom just went along with it, like she'd laugh at his jokes and tell us to stop being so sensitive when we got upset. The turning point came when I was 15, and Catalina was 11. Frederick called this emergency family meeting in the garage on a Sunday afternoon. I still remember everything about that day. It was hot as balls. I was wearing this faded green t-shirt with a hole in the armpit, and Catalina had her hair in these little braids Mom had done the night before. When we walked in, Frederick had set up 6 folding chairs in a semicircle. He had this whiteboard with our names on it, and this homemade cardboard wheel with our 4 names. Me, Catalina, Everly, Oscar. Mom was standing there with actual cue cards in her hands, looking nervous but excited. Frederick started this whole game, show host routine. Welcome to Who Stays, Who Goes, the show where we determine which lucky contestants get to remain part of this family. I thought it was some weird joke at first, but then I saw the suitcases behind him. Mom read from her cards about how blended families often fail because stepchildren create too much tension. And studies show 73% of remarriages with children end in divorce due to stepchild issues. She kept using this fake TV host voice that made my stomach hurt. Catalina grabbed my hand and whispered, asking if this was real. Frederick heard her and was like, "Oh, it's very real." Today, 2 lucky contestants get to stay, and 2 get to go. Then he had his kids come out with party poppers in those plastic champagne glasses. He spun the wheel, and it landed on the line between me and Catalina. He acted all shocked, like, "Oh my goodness." For the first time in show history, we have 2 losers in one spin. His kids were literally cheering and high-fiving. Frederick announced we had 30 minutes to pack our essentials, and that we were no longer welcome in his house. Mom handed us each a black garbage bag and said, "Suitcases are for family members. These are for guests who've overstayed their welcome." I was in complete shock, but Catalina started crying, and that snapped me out of it. I got in Frederick's face and told him he couldn't do this to us. He shoved me backward and said, if we weren't out in 30 minutes, he'd call the cops and report us for trespassing. I looked at Mom like, "Are you seriously letting this happen?" And she just handed me a printed sheet of paper with Dad's address and said, "I've already called him. He's expecting you." Then the most up part. Frederick made us hand over our house keys and used his phone to record us saying we voluntarily leave the residence and surrender all access rights. When I refused, he grabbed my arm and twisted until I said it. While we were packing, Everly and Oscar kept coming into our rooms, taking souvenirs, stuff they claimed they always wanted. Everly took Catalina's collection of crystals she'd been gathering since she was 7. Oscar grabbed my gaming headset and Bluetooth speaker. When we protested, Frederick said, "Winners get the spoils." We shoved whatever we could into those garbage bags. I grabbed important stuff for Catalina, like her favorite stuffed rabbit and photo albums. Mom stood in the doorway the whole time, checking her watch and reminding us, 20 minutes left, 15 minutes left. Dad was waiting outside in his beat-up Corolla when we came out. Frederick and his kids were on the front porch drinking actual champagne and taking photos of us walking to Dad's car with our garbage bags. Dad looked like he wanted to kill someone, but I shook my head. We just needed to get Catalina out of there. Turns out Frederick had been planning this for months. He'd been telling neighbors and school staff that me and Catalina were troubled kids with serious behavioral issues. He'd been setting the stage, so when we suddenly disappeared, he could control the narrative. Those first few months at Dad's place were rough. He was living in a one-bedroom apartment in the shitty part of town. Catalina and I shared the bedroom, while Dad slept on a pull-out couch. But Dad tried his best. He picked up extra shifts and found a lawyer friend who worked pro bono to try to fight for our stuff, still at Mom's. The lawyer couldn't do much. Turns out Frederick had recordings of us willingly leaving, and Mom backed his story that we were destructive and dangerous to his real children. The courts basically said since Dad had custody now, there was no issue to resolve. The worst part was watching Catalina fall apart. She went from this bright, chatty kid to barely speaking. She had nightmares almost every night. She'd call Mom, who would either not pick up or talk for like 2 minutes before making excuses to hang up. Mom saw her maybe once every couple months, always at a restaurant. Never at home. I graduated high school with decent grades despite everything, and got a partial scholarship to state college, worked part-time to help Dad with rent, and to save for Catalina's therapy. Dad refused to take any child support from Mom, which she barely paid anyway, and put it all towards Catalina's future. Frederick made sure we knew we were garbage. He'd send emails with photos of family vacations and holidays with captions like family memories being made. He'd have Mom call on Christmas to tell us they couldn't see us because they were going to the Bahamas with the family. Fast forward to 2 weeks ago. Dad passed away last year from a heart attack. He was only 49. Worked himself to death trying to give us a decent life. Going through his papers, I found something interesting. Turns out Dad had never signed over his portion of ownership in the house he and Mom had before the divorce. See, Mom and Dad bought that house together when I was 4. When they split, Mom kept living there with us kids. When she married Frederick, they sold that house and used the money as a down payment on the McMansion. But the lawyer Dad used during the divorce was incompetent, and the paperwork transferring Dad's portion of ownership to Mom was never properly filed, which means technically, Dad still owned 50% of that original house value, which means I inherited his claim as his sole heir. Catalina was still a minor, so everything came to me with provisions for her. I did some digging and found out something even better. Frederick's successful businesses have been struggling for years. That McMansion, it's mortgaged to the hilt. They've refinanced 3 times in 5 years and are underwater on the payments. Even better, turns out Frederick used the equity from that original house, the one Dad partially owned, as collateral for business loans for businesses that are now failing. And he never had the legal right to use that full equity, because Dad still owned half of it. I contacted a lawyer, a good one this time, confirmed everything, had all the documents drawn up, and 2 days ago, I pulled the trigger. That's when my WhatsApp blew up. Mom sending frantic messages. Please answer. This is your mother. What did you do? Everything is ruined. The police were here. Please stop this. Frederick tried calling me 27 times in 1 hour, left voicemails threatening to destroy me, then suddenly switching to offering to talk this out, like men. I haven't responded to any of it. The lawyer says not to, but I've waited 12 years for this moment. I've got Catalina beside me now. She's 23, graduated college last year, still dealing with the trauma, but getting stronger every day. We're watching their lives implode in real time, and this is just the beginning. I've got so much more planned for them. Part of me feels bad for Mom, but then I remember her standing there with those cue cards, telling us to put our stuff in garbage bags because suitcases are for family. I'll update when the next phase hits. These people stole our childhood and broke my sister. Now I'm going to take everything from them. Update 1. Holy you guys. The response to my last post was insane. I've been reading all your comments and messages between lawyer calls and watching my stepdad's life implode. LOL. So, picking up where I left off after finding those documents and Dad's stuff, I wasn't 100% sure what I had. I mean, I'm not a legal expert, and those papers were from like 12 years ago, but I had this gut feeling that I had stumbled onto something big. First thing I did was call my dad's old friend, Keith, who helped us move that day. He confirmed what I suspected. Dad always complained that his divorce lawyer screwed him over and never finalized the house transfer. Dad basically just gave up fighting because he was exhausted and broke. I spent about 3 weeks quietly researching Frederick's businesses. Not going to lie, I might have created a fake Instagram account to follow some of his employees and business partners. LOL. From their posts, I could tell things weren't great. Lots of challenging times, and pushing through difficulties type posts. One manager literally posted about having to bring her own printer paper to work, because budget cuts. The deeper I dug, the more I realized Frederick's whole empire was basically a house of cards. He owns 3 businesses, a restaurant supply company, a small real estate firm, and some kind of consulting business that honestly seems like but they all feed into each other in this circular way, to make them look more successful than they are. While I was looking into all this, I got a DM that nearly made me drop my phone. It was from Michaela, Frederick's daughter, from his first marriage. Yeah, turns out Everly and Oscar aren't his only bio kids. Michaela is 32 and was basically written out of the family when she refused to loan Frederick money for his businesses 5 years ago. We met for coffee, and she told me about Frederick. Apparently, he has a pattern of doing this. He married her mom, had kids, then traded up for a better model when a richer opportunity came along. And get this, the reason he hated me and Catalina so much, he was convinced we weren't even my mom's real kids. He had this crazy theory that Dad had cheated and we were some other woman's children that Mom got stuck with. Which is like insane. We both look exactly like Mom. Michaela had kept tabs on her dad's businesses because she was worried he'd try to come after her inheritance from her grandparents. She had all kinds of financial intel that confirmed what I suspected. Frederick was in deep financial trouble. The pandemic hit his restaurant supply business hard, and he'd been taking out loans using various properties as collateral to keep everything afloat. With Michaela's help, I found a lawyer who specializes in estate fraud. Not cheap, but worth every penny. I showed him all the documents and explained the situation. His eyes literally lit up when he saw that Dad's name was still on the deed for that original house. Turns out Frederick had committed actual fraud. When he and Mom sold that house and used the money for the McMansion down payment, he legally needed Dad's signature since Dad still owned half, but he forged it. Then he used the equity from the McMansion, which was partially bought with money that should have been Dad's, as collateral for business loans. Basically, Frederick built his whole empire on stolen money, my money. Now, the lawyer drafted up official letters to the banks that issued Frederick's loans, his business partners, the county property assessor, the state business licensing board, all explaining that a significant portion of his collateral was based on fraudulently obtained property. Basically saying, hey, this guy committed fraud, and we have proof. We didn't go to the police because the lawyer said that would take forever and might not even result in charges. Instead, we hit him where it really hurts, his reputation and credit. 2 days after those letters went out, my phone absolutely blew up. Mom called 17 times in 1 hour. Frederick sent these increasingly desperate texts going from "this is a misunderstanding" to "you ungrateful piece of" to "we can work something out" in the span of like 30 minutes. I didn't answer any of them. The lawyer said not to engage at all, so I just watched the notifications stack up while drinking a beer with Catalina. Then they showed up at my apartment, just walked right up and started pounding on the door at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. I looked through the peephole and saw Mom crying, and Frederick red-faced and sweaty. Catalina was staying with me that week, and she started having a panic attack as soon as she heard Frederick's voice. I called the building security and they escorted them out. Frederick tried to shove the security guy who pushed him back against the wall pretty hard. Mom was screaming that I was destroying our family, which was rich coming from her. The next morning, I got an email from Frederick's lawyer trying to set up a meeting to resolve the misunderstanding amicably. The tone was super condescending, like I was some dumb kid who didn't understand what I was doing. My lawyer responded with a single sentence: "All communication must go through this office." That afternoon, I got a call from Oscar, Frederick's son, now 24. He was actually civil. Said he had no idea what had happened when we were kids. Claimed Frederick and Mom told him we'd been caught stealing and had to go live with Dad as punishment. When I told him about the game show, he went completely silent, then said, "That explains a lot," before hanging up. An hour later, Everly, now 26, texted calling me a liar and saying I was just jealous of their real family. Said I was making up stories to get money. I sent her a photo of the actual deed with Dad's name still on it. She blocked me, LOL. Things moved fast after that. One of Frederick's business partners called my lawyer wanting to know if they were liable for any of this. The bank that held the mortgage on the McMansion started foreclosure proceedings. Frederick's restaurant supply company had its line of credit frozen. The best part: turns out Frederick had been hiding money problems from Mom for years. She thought they were still rich, but they'd been living on credit cards and loans for at least 3 years. She found out they were 6 months behind on the McMansion mortgage. At the same time, she discovered he'd committed fraud using Dad's property. Last Friday, Mom showed up at my workplace. She somehow got past the front desk and cornered me in the break room. She looked terrible, like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair wasn't done, no makeup, wearing the same kind of sweatpants she used to yell at me for wearing in public because they looked trashy. She started with the tears, saying she never wanted to kick us out, that Frederick made her do it. Said he threatened to leave her with nothing if she didn't play along with his game, then switched to anger when she saw I wasn't sympathetic, saying I was being cruel and heartless, that I was just like your father, holding grudges. I just looked at her and asked if she remembered telling Catalina that suitcases are for family while handing her a trash bag for her clothes. She slapped me hard across the face. My coworker Jen saw the whole thing and immediately called security. Mom was escorted out screaming that I was ruining her life. I filed a police report about the assault, not because it hurt, it barely did, but because I wanted a record of everything. The lawyer said documentation is key. Meanwhile, Frederick's been trying to salvage his businesses by reaching out to everyone he knows for emergency loans. But word has spread about the fraud investigation, and nobody wants to touch him. 2 of his longtime employees quit very publicly, posting about ethical concerns on LinkedIn. Yesterday, I got a letter in the actual mail from Frederick, handwritten on fancy stationery. It was bizarre, rambling about how he never meant to hurt anyone, how he was just trying to create a cohesive family unit, and thought Catalina and I were undermining his authority. Said he didn't realize Dad never signed over the house, and it was an honest oversight. Then came the kicker. He admitted the real reason he wanted us gone. Apparently, Mom had told him before they got married that she'd leave him, just like she left your father if he didn't make her happy. He was terrified she'd take half his money in a divorce. So, he decided to remove the elements that reminded her of her previous life, meaning me and Catalina. He thought if we were gone, she'd be fully committed to their new family. Basically, he saw us as competition for Mom's attention and reminders of her willingness to leave a marriage. So, he engineered the whole game show as a way to get rid of us while making it seem like Mom's idea too, so she couldn't blame just him. I showed the letter to my lawyer, who basically said it was a gold mine of admissions we could use. This morning, I got word that the bank is accelerating the foreclosure on the McMansion due to the fraud evidence. Frederick and Mom have 60 days to pay the remaining mortgage balance in full, over $750,000, or get out. This is just the beginning. The State Business Licensing Board is reviewing his licenses. The bank is considering criminal charges for the loan fraud. His restaurant supply company is losing clients daily. And I haven't even played my biggest card yet. Turns out, Dad left me one more gift that Frederick doesn't know about. Something that will absolutely destroy what's left of his reputation and business. Catalina says I should stop, that we've done enough damage. Part of me wonders if she's right. But then I remember her crying in Dad's car, holding a garbage bag of her belongings, while Frederick and his kids drank champagne and laughed. No, this isn't over. Not even close. I promised my 15-year-old self I'd make them pay someday, and I always keep my promises. Update 2. Hey everyone, sorry for the delay in updating. Has been wild these past couple weeks. Like truly insane. I've been taking screenshots of all the messages and calls because someday I might not believe this actually happened. LOL. So remember that one more card I mentioned in my last update? Well, it turns out Dad was even smarter than I thought. After the whole game show incident, he started keeping records of everything. Like he had an actual folder labeled Frederick's BS on his laptop with screenshots, recordings, emails, everything. The biggest bombshell, Dad had recorded a phone call with Frederick from about 2 months after we were kicked out. Dad was trying to get our stuff back, and Frederick basically admitted on tape that the whole eviction was planned to get rid of the baggage, so he could start fresh with a real family. He even laughed about the game show format, saying it was more entertaining than just telling them to get out. I found this recording buried in an old email folder. Dad had sent it to his lawyer, but nothing ever came of it because technically we were living with Mom voluntarily according to the custody agreement, and Frederick owned the house. Legally, they could ask us to leave. The way they did it was cruel, but not technically illegal. Anyway, I sent this recording to Frederick's 3 biggest business partners. Didn't add any commentary, just forwarded it with the subject line. Thought you should hear this. Within 24 hours, all 3 partners had pulled out of deals with him. One of them has a stepdaughter herself, and apparently went ballistic when she heard the recording. Frederick called me screaming, like I had to hold the phone away from my ear. He threatened to sue me for defamation, for harassment, for tortious interference. Had to Google that one, LOL. I just let him yell himself out and then said, "Everything I sent was true and documented. Go ahead and sue me. The discovery process would be fascinating." He hung up. That night, someone threw a rock through my apartment window. No proof it was Frederick, but come on. I filed another police report and got a Ring doorbell installed the next day. My neighbor across the hall saw a car matching Frederick's parked outside around the time it happened. Catalina decided to stay with her roommate for a while because she was scared Frederick might do something crazy. Can't blame her TBH. She's still dealing with anxiety from all those years ago, and this whole situation has been triggering for her. 2 days after the window incident, I got an email from someone claiming to be a tenant in one of Frederick's rental properties. Turns out his real estate firm is basically just him renting out 6 houses he bought during the housing crash. This tenant sent me photos showing serious mold issues and electrical problems that Frederick had refused to fix for months. I forwarded these to the county housing authority. Within a week, Frederick was hit with over $50,000 in fines and mandatory repair orders. His tenants were also given the option to break their leases without penalty. So now Frederick is losing his business partners, facing foreclosure on the McMansion, bleeding money on rental properties he can't afford to fix under investigation for fraud. Mom, meanwhile, has been doing damage control with family and friends. My Aunt Debbie, Mom's sister, called me absolutely livid after finally hearing the full story of what happened when we were kids. Apparently, Mom had told everyone that we chose to live with Dad because we couldn't handle Frederick's rules and wanted more freedom. Debbie came over with a bottle of tequila, and we got drunk while I showed her all the evidence. She cried when she heard the recording of Frederick laughing about the game show. She kept saying she had no idea that Mom had made it sound like a mutual decision for us to live with Dad. The next day, Debbie confronted Mom at their weekly coffee meetup. Mom apparently broke down crying in the middle of Starbucks, causing a whole scene. Said she knew what they did was wrong, but she was scared Frederick would leave her if she didn't go along with it. Said she'd spent the last 12 years trying to make it up to him for having kids from her previous marriage. And Debbie told her that was the most pathetic thing she'd ever heard, and left her sitting there. Mom showed up at my apartment again the next day. This time she wasn't crying or yelling. She looked defeated. She asked if we could talk, said she had something important to tell me. Against my better judgment, I let her in. She sat on my couch, wouldn't take off her coat, even though it was warm inside, and stared at her hands for like 5 minutes before speaking. When she finally did, it was like a dam breaking. Turns out Frederick had been threatening to leave her for years. Anytime she tried to contact us or send birthday presents, he'd start talking about divorce. He convinced her that if they divorced, she'd get nothing because of some prenup she signed. She was terrified of being poor again, like she was with Dad. I asked her straight up, was it worth it trading her own children for financial security? She couldn't even look at me. She also admitted something that made me want to punch a wall. After the game show, Frederick made her block Dad's number and change her email so Dad couldn't contact her directly about us. The few times Dad managed to reach her through friends, Frederick would punish her by taking away her credit cards or canceling trips they had planned. I almost felt sorry for her, until she started with the, "But you don't understand how hard it's been for me." I cut her off and told her to leave. She started crying again, but I just opened the door and stood there until she left. The next day, Oscar, Frederick's son, texted asking if we could meet. We met at a coffee shop near my place. He looked rough, like he hadn't been sleeping. He said after hearing about the game show, he'd started remembering other up things Frederick had done over the years. Apparently, Frederick had pulled similar stunts with Oscar's friends. If he didn't like a particular friend, he'd find ways to humiliate them until they stopped coming over. He once made Oscar's best friend eat dinner in the garage because he'd tracked mud into the house. Oscar said he'd always known his dad was strict, but he'd never connected the dots until now. He apologized for taking my gaming headset that day. Said he'd buy me a new one. I told him to keep his money. This wasn't about headsets. Then he dropped a bombshell. Everly has been defending Frederick this whole time because he's been secretly paying for her apartment and car. She's basically financially dependent on him, and she's terrified of losing her lifestyle. Speaking of Everly, she unblocked me to send a long rambling text about how I'm destroying the only family she has, and how I need to stop before people get really hurt. It was half threat, half desperate plea. I didn't respond. Frederick tried a new approach next. He had his lawyer contact mine with a settlement offer. He'd pay me $75,000 if I dropped everything and signed an NDA. My lawyer actually laughed out loud when he told me. We counted with a demand for $750,000, the exact amount of their mortgage, knowing he couldn't pay it. His lawyer came back with $150,000 paid over 5 years. We declined. Meanwhile, the foreclosure process is moving forward. Frederick and Mom have to be out of the McMansion in 3 weeks. I drove by there yesterday and saw a moving truck in the driveway. Frederick was standing in the front yard, looking at the house while 2 guys loaded furniture. He looked like he'd aged 10 years. Yesterday, I got a call from Michaela, Frederick's daughter, from his first marriage. She told me Frederick had called her, begging for a loan, offered to sign over his failing businesses to her if she'd just help with the mortgage. She told him to go to hell. She also told me something I didn't know. Frederick did the same trading up thing with her mom, divorced her when a richer woman came along, then gradually cut Michaela out of his life when she wouldn't play along with his perfect family narrative. This morning, I woke up to an email from Frederick himself. No lawyer, no threats, just desperation. He admitted everything. Said he'd always resented me and Catalina because Mom would compare us to his kids. Said Catalina was smarter than Everly, and I was more responsible than Oscar. He wrote that he couldn't stand being compared unfavorably to Dad, so he decided to eliminate the competition entirely. The game show was his idea, but Mom agreed to it because he convinced her it would strengthen their marriage. But here's the most up part. He said the reason he hated us so much was because we reminded him of himself. He grew up poor, clawed his way into money, and was terrified of going back. He saw the same determination in me and thought someday I'd threaten his success. He ended the email by saying he knows he deserves everything happening to him, but asked if I would at least stop pursuing his business partner so he could salvage something to support Mom. I didn't respond. This afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Frederick's sister, Laura. I'd met her maybe twice at holiday dinners years ago. She was crying, said Frederick had tried to kill himself last night. He took a bunch of sleeping pills, but Mom found him and called 911. He's physically okay, but on psychiatric hold for 72 hours. Laura asked if I would consider easing up on the legal pressure until he's more stable. I told her I'd stand right now. Frederick's in the hospital. Mom's packing up their mansion. Oscar's having some kind of identity crisis. Everly's panicking about her financial future, and Catalina's staying with friends because she's afraid to be near any of this. Part of me feels like I should stop, like maybe this has gone far enough. But then I remember sitting in Dad's car, with garbage bags full of our belongings, watching Frederick and his kids drinking champagne on the porch while they laughed at us. I remember Dad working himself to death to give us a decent life after we were thrown away, like trash. I remember Catalina crying herself to sleep for months. So, no, I don't think I'm done yet. Frederick said in his email that he was afraid I'd threaten his success someday. He was right to be afraid. The final phase of my plan starts tomorrow, and this one's going to hurt them in a way they never saw coming. Final update. Okay, so I know it's been a minute since my last update, but TBH, I needed some time to process everything that's happened. This has been intense, and sometimes I still can't believe how everything went down. After Frederick's suicide attempt, I did seriously consider backing off. Like, as much as I hate the guy, I didn't want his actual death on my conscience. I talked to Catalina about it for hours, and we both agreed we wanted justice. Not that. But backing off didn't mean stopping completely. While Frederick was still in the hospital, I went ahead with what I call the nuclear option. I contacted the state tax authority with all the documentation showing Frederick had been hiding income and assets for years. See, while going through Dad's stuff, I found more than just property documents. Dad had kept records of child support payments, including the ones Mom claimed she never received. Turns out Frederick had been helping Mom handle her finances, which basically meant diverting her child support payments into one of his business accounts, and telling her Dad never paid. When the state investigators looked into it, they found Frederick had been doing this for years, not just with Mom's child support, but with his businesses too. He'd been claiming losses while hiding profits, under-reporting income, and basically committing tax fraud left and right. 3 days after I sent in the documents, Frederick was released from the psychiatric facility, only to find state tax investigators waiting to interview him. According to Oscar, who's been keeping me updated, Frederick walked into the house, saw the investigators sitting in his living room, and just deflated, like all the fight went out of him in an instant. They spent 8 hours going through his records. By the end, he was facing over $300,000 in back taxes, penalties, and interest. The investigator told him they'd be freezing his assets pending further review. That night, Mom called me sobbing so hard, I could barely understand her. Between gasps, she told me they had nowhere to go. The McMansion was being foreclosed on, their bank accounts were frozen, and none of their friends would take them in. She asked if she could stay with me, just until we figure things out. I laughed. I actually laughed. I asked her if she remembered telling me and Catalina we had 30 minutes to pack our stuff in garbage bags. She went quiet. then whispered that she was sorry, that she'd been a terrible mother. Too little, too late. I told her to call Aunt Debbie. I knew Debbie would help her, not because she deserved it, but because Debbie's a decent human being, unlike some people. The next day, Oscar texted saying Frederick and Mom were staying at a Motel 6 while they figured out what to do. Everly was having a meltdown because Frederick had to cut off her allowance, and she couldn't afford her rent without it. The tax investigation triggered a domino effect. Once the state got involved, Frederick's remaining business partners cut all ties. His restaurant supply company filed for bankruptcy the following week. His consulting business, which was basically just him charging people for advice, dried up overnight when word got around about the fraud investigation. Here's where things got interesting. Frederick tried to throw Mom under the bus, told investigators she was the one who handled the finances and must have been the one hiding income, claimed he had no idea about any of it. Mom, to her credit, and I don't give her credit for much, refused to take the fall. She showed investigators emails where Frederick specifically instructed her what to write in the accounting books. She had years of these emails saved because, as she later told Aunt Debbie, she always knew he might turn on her someday. 2 weeks after the investigation started, Frederick was charged with multiple counts of tax evasion, fraud, and falsifying business records. Mom was charged as an accessory, but got a deal for cooperating. Frederick is looking at potentially 3 to 5 years in prison, plus massive fines. The day after the charges were announced, I got a strange message on Instagram from someone I didn't recognize. It was a guy named Clifford, who said he used to work for Frederick. Apparently, when he heard about Frederick's arrest, he wanted to share something with me. We met at a Starbucks near my place. Clifford brought a folder full of documents showing Frederick had been planning to ditch Mom for the past 2 years. He'd been moving money into hidden accounts, setting up a new identity, the works. He was literally weeks away from disappearing with all their money when my revenge plan kicked in and derailed everything. So, Mom would have ended up with nothing either way. Karma's, I guess. I debated whether to tell Mom about this. Ended up sending the documents to Aunt Debbie instead and letting her decide. Debbie showed them to Mom, who apparently had a complete breakdown. She'd sacrificed her relationship with her own children for a man who was planning to abandon her all along. Meanwhile, Catalina decided she wanted to confront Frederick face to face. I wasn't sure this was a good idea, but she insisted she needed closure. I went with her for support, and honestly, to make sure I didn't end up having to bail her out for assault, lol. We met Frederick at a Denny's near his motel. He looked like absolute unshaven, bags under his eyes, wearing the same wrinkled polo shirt he'd probably been wearing for days. When he saw us walk in, he straightened up like he was trying to look dignified, but it just came across as pathetic. Catalina sat across from him, looked him dead in the eyes, and asked one question. "Why did you hate us so much?" Frederick stared at his coffee for a long time before answering. He said when he was a kid, his stepdad treated him like garbage, made him eat in the garage, gave his stuff away to his real kids, the works. He swore he'd never be that guy. But then he met Mom and us, and something just broke in him. He said seeing me and Catalina reminded him of his own weakness, his own past. He couldn't stand it. So he decided to become the abuser instead of the abused. Thought it would make him feel powerful. I asked if it worked, if hurting 2 kids made him feel like a big man. He just shook his head and said it never did. Said he felt like every time he saw the hurt in our eyes, but he couldn't stop. It was like he was punishing us for his own pain. Catalina listened to all this, then stood up and said the most badass thing. "I came here thinking I needed your apology to heal. I don't. You're exactly who I thought you were. A weak, pathetic man who hurts children to feel strong. I'm not like you. I'll never be like you. And that's all the closure I need." She walked out with her head high. I stayed just long enough to leave 40 cents as a tip. A reference to the time Frederick gave me 40 cents for getting straight A's and called it generous. Petty? Yeah. Satisfying? Absolutely. The legal proceedings moved surprisingly fast. Frederick took a plea deal to avoid a longer sentence. 3 years in prison plus 5 years probation, and he has to pay back all the taxes plus penalties. Mom got probation and community service. She's living with Aunt Debbie now, working at a grocery store to pay back her part of the fines. She tries to call me and Catalina every week. Sometimes we answer, sometimes we don't. As for the financial side of things, my lawyer was able to get a settlement from the equity that was rightfully Dad's from the original house. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to pay off Catalina's student loans and put a down payment on a small house for me. Here's the kicker. The house I bought, it's the same one Mom and Dad owned when I was a kid, the one whose equity Frederick stole. It had been through a couple owners since then, but when it came on the market, I knew it was meant to be. Catalina comes over every Sunday for dinner. We're slowly replacing the childhood memories we lost with new ones. Last week, we painted the living room together, laughing about how Dad used to get more paint on himself than the walls. Oscar reached out recently, said he's in therapy trying to unpack all the up things Frederick did to him, too. Turns out Frederick was abusive to his real kids as well, just in different ways, more psychological than physical. We get coffee sometimes and talk. It's awkward, but getting better. Everly still hasn't spoken to me. Last I heard, she's living with Frederick's sister, Laura, and working at a nail salon. She posted some vague on Instagram about family loyalty that was obviously aimed at Oscar for talking to me. Whatever. Michaela, Frederick's daughter from his first marriage, and I have actually become friends. She's like the big sister I never had. She gets it in a way most people don't, what it's like to be discarded by a parent who is supposed to love you. Frederick went to prison last month. He tried to send me and Catalina letters, but we returned them unopened. Some wounds are too deep for words to heal. Mom asks about reconciliation every time we talk. I'm not there yet. Might never be. She made her choice 12 years ago, and we all have to live with the consequences. As for me, I'm doing okay. Better than okay, actually. The rage that's been driving me for so long has finally started to fade. Not completely. I don't think it ever will, but enough that I can sleep at night without dreaming about garbage bags and folding chairs set up like a game show. Sometimes I still can't believe I actually pulled it off. That the kid who got kicked out with a trash bag full of clothes managed to bring down the man, who seemed so powerful and untouchable. But you know what? The best revenge wasn't watching Frederick lose his business or go to jail. It wasn't seeing Mom forced to work minimum wage or live with my aunt. The best revenge was the moment Catalina walked out of that Denny's with her head high, finally free of the power they had over her. Watching my little sister reclaim herself, that's worth more than all the houses and money in the world. Dad would be proud, not of the revenge, maybe, but of the fact that his kids survived, that we're still here, still fighting, still looking out for each other when the rest of the world turned its back. That day in the garage when Frederick spun that wheel with our names on it, I whispered to Catalina that we'd survive, and someday make them pay. Promise kept, little sis. Promise kept.